At the time everything unfolded, Sarah Patricia Good was raising her 4-year-old daughter, Jocelyn, entirely on her own. Those closest to Sarah consistently described her as warm, dependable, and deeply nurturing. She had a natural maternal instinct that was evident to anyone who spent time with her. Becoming a mother brought her genuine joy, and when she learned she was pregnant, she embraced the responsibility without hesitation. While the identity of Jocelyn's father and the circumstances surrounding Sarah's single motherhood were never publicly clarified, one thing was certain: Sarah was committed to protecting and providing for her child at all costs. By 2014, Sarah was living in Medford on Long Island and working full-time as a medical technician. Balancing demanding shifts with the responsibilities of motherhood was not easy, especially at just 21 years old. Still, she managed her routine well and took pride in being self-sufficient. Though her days were often exhausting, Sarah occasionally allowed herself small breaks to decompress, understanding the importance of mental balance. On the evening of June 6, 2014, Sarah had plans, something she didn't get to enjoy very often. Friends had invited her to a party, and she was genuinely looking forward to the chance to relax. To make it possible, she arranged for her brother-in-law to watch Jocelyn for the night. After finishing her work shift, Sarah returned home, made sure everything was in order, prepared for the evening, and spent a few quiet moments with her daughter. She hugged her tightly, kissed her goodbye, and left the house, unaware that this would be the last time Jocelyn would ever see her mother. Sarah did attend the gathering, and by all outward appearances, the night went smoothly. Guests socialized, laughed, and took photos, images that would later resurface online and take on a haunting significance. In those moments, Sarah was alive, present, and surrounded by people. No one sensed that something catastrophic was approaching. The following day, Sarah's mother attempted to contact her. When no call or message was returned, she assumed Sarah was simply resting after being out late. There was no immediate cause for alarm. Sarah was expected to visit family soon anyway, especially with her nephew's birthday approaching. But when that day arrived and Sarah never showed, concern quickly turned into fear. Sarah had never missed that birthday before. Combined with her total silence, no texts, no calls, no social media activity, the absence felt wrong. Even more troubling was the fact that Sarah had a young child depending on her. She wouldn't have vanished without making arrangements. She wouldn't have abandoned her life without warning. When Sarah failed to report to work as well, her family knew something was seriously wrong. Authorities were contacted, and Sarah Good was officially reported missing. From the very beginning, investigators understood that this was not a voluntary disappearance. A devoted mother does not simply walk away from her child, her job, and her family overnight. And as police began retracing her final known movements, one unsettling question loomed over everything. How did an ordinary night out end with a young mother vanishing without a trace? Investigators immediately began assembling a timeline of Sarah's last known hours. The party she attended on June 6th became the focal point of the search, as it was the final confirmed location where anyone had seen her alive. Detectives canvassed the area, spoke with attendees, and attempted to determine whether Sarah had left with someone or contacted anyone afterward. According to those present, nothing out of the ordinary stood out that night. There were no visible arguments, no dramatic exits, and no signs that Sarah was in distress when she left. Still, one detail quickly raised concern. Police learned that Sarah's money had been withdrawn or taken sometime after the party. Combined with her disappearance, this suggested that foul play was likely involved. Officers also noted that Sarah had not taken any personal belongings with her that would indicate she intended to leave town or start a new life. Everything about the situation pointed toward something having gone terribly wrong after she left the gathering. With no immediate leads, law enforcement expanded the search. Sarah's home was examined, along with nearby roads and neighborhoods. Friends, co-workers, and family members were questioned in hopes that someone might recall a small detail that could help. Officers were particularly focused on locating Sarah's vehicle, believing it could provide crucial evidence. 2 days into the investigation, on June 8th, that break finally came. A gray 1999 BMW 328i was discovered in the Medford area, roughly a mile from Sarah's residence. The car was unmistakably hers. It appeared abandoned, and police were notified right away. When officers arrived, they found no sign of Sarah in or around the vehicle. As they examined the car more closely, it became clear that this was no ordinary abandonment. The interior was in complete disarray. Large portions of the inside were stained red, and a bloody handprint was visible on the hood. Clumps of hair were caught near one of the windows. There was no doubt something violent had occurred. The scene immediately shifted the investigation from a missing person case to a potential homicide. For the officers on site, the discovery was deeply unsettling. The sheer amount of biological evidence suggested a brutal struggle. DNA samples were collected from multiple surfaces, and the vehicle was secured for further forensic analysis. At the same time, search teams were dispatched to comb the surrounding area, hoping, desperately, that Sarah might still be found alive. As hours passed, optimism faded. The condition of the car told a grim story, one that left little room for hope. Detectives understood that time was no longer on their side. If Sarah had survived whatever happened in that vehicle, she would need to be found quickly. While forensic teams worked through the night, volunteers joined the search effort, spreading out across nearby wooded areas and open land. Everyone involved felt the weight of the situation growing heavier by the hour. Somewhere close by, answers were waiting. And only days later, those answers would arrive in the most devastating way imaginable. 6 days after Sarah disappeared, the search intensified in the wooded areas surrounding where her vehicle had been found. Volunteers joined law enforcement, moving carefully through dense brush and uneven terrain. One of those volunteers, David Zorns, later recalled that the atmosphere felt wrong almost immediately. As the group entered the woods, a strong, foul odor hung in the air, something that could not be ignored. Before the volunteers could go any further, police officers instructed them to leave the area. Moments earlier, investigators had made a grim discovery. A body had been found hidden among the trees. At first glance, it was clear the victim had suffered extreme violence. The woman was deceased, her body bearing numerous visible injuries that told the story of a brutal attack. Officers noticed multiple cuts and signs of severe trauma. Then one detail stood out with devastating clarity: a flower tattoo on the woman's foot. That tattoo matched one shown on Sarah Good's missing person flyers. The fear investigators had been trying to avoid was now confirmed. The young woman found in the woods was 21-year-old Sarah. The news shattered her family. Any lingering hope that Sarah might still be alive vanished instantly. She would never return home to her daughter. Jocelyn would grow up without her mother, and the entire community was left reeling. What was supposed to be a simple night out had ended in a senseless and violent death. As investigators processed the scene, the scale of the crime became even more apparent. Sarah had been beaten severely and assaulted before being left in the woods. The brutality suggested rage rather than randomness. This was not an opportunistic crime. It was personal. With Sarah's body recovered, the investigation shifted fully toward identifying who was responsible. Detectives reviewed every statement they had gathered since the search began, paying closer attention to the party where Sarah was last seen. It became increasingly clear that someone at that gathering might hold the key to what happened. Several witnesses mentioned a man who had shown unusual interest in Sarah throughout the night. According to multiple accounts, he approached her repeatedly, asking her out despite her lack of interest. His persistence stood out, especially as the evening progressed and Sarah made it clear she was not looking for anything romantic. Police wanted to know more about this individual. Who was he? Why had he focused so intensely on Sarah? And what happened after she rejected him? That man was identified as Dante Taylor. As detectives began digging into Dante's background, they realized this was not just another party guest. There were aspects of his past and his behavior that immediately raised concern, and soon the case against him would begin to take shape. Dante Taylor was not a stranger to those at the party. Several attendees recognized him, and some knew him casually. Investigators learned that Dante had previously served in the United States Marines, though his time there was brief, lasting only around 7 months before he was discharged. Beyond that, information about his life was limited. But what did surface painted a troubling picture. People who knew both Dante and Sarah described him as emotionally unstable. He had gone through a difficult divorce that reportedly affected him deeply. Friends later shared that he struggled significantly after the separation and had expressed suicidal thoughts in the past. There were also reports that Dante had experienced abuse during his childhood, something that appeared to have left lasting psychological damage. While those details did not excuse violence, they added context to his mental state. During the party on June 6th, Dante's behavior towards Sarah became increasingly uncomfortable. Witnesses stated that he repeatedly attempted to engage her romantically. Sarah, however, had no interest. She was there to spend time with friends, nothing more. She declined his advances again and again, making her lack of interest clear. Despite this, Dante did not stop. His persistence escalated, even as the night began winding down. Eventually, Sarah had enough and disengaged entirely. To her, it was likely just an unpleasant interaction she wanted to forget. To investigators, it was a critical detail. As police examined the evidence, the pattern became hard to ignore. A man who could not accept rejection. A woman who simply wanted to go home. What happened between those two moments would define the rest of the case. Dante was brought in for questioning only days after Sarah's body was discovered. He was easy to locate and cooperative on the surface. However, this is where the investigation took a controversial turn. During this initial interaction, Dante was not read his Miranda rights. Despite that, police collected his DNA and other evidence without establishing proper probable cause. This procedural error would later become a major point of contention. Regardless of guilt or innocence, law enforcement is required to follow strict legal protocols. The failure to do so opened the door for serious criticism and legal challenges. Many felt that detectives, eager for answers, rushed the process and focused too heavily on their primary suspect. As a result of this misstep, Dante was released and allowed to leave. What he did next only added to the suspicion surrounding him. Shortly after being questioned, Dante boarded a flight from New York to Florida. Reports indicated that his mother had urged him to go and wait until things settled down. His attorney later claimed the trip was simply a visit to family and not an attempt to flee. Still, the timing raised eyebrows. To many, it looked like an effort to distance himself from an investigation that was rapidly closing in. Meanwhile, detectives waited for forensic results that could either confirm or dismantle their suspicions. Those results would soon arrive, and when they did, the case would change forever. When the forensic analysis was completed, the results were impossible to ignore. DNA recovered from the interior of Sarah's car matched Dante Taylor. His palm print was also identified on the vehicle. There was no legitimate reason for him to have been inside her car at any point that night. The evidence placed him directly at the center of the crime scene. Investigators reconstructed what they believed had happened. After Sarah left the party, Dante likely followed her. Despite being rejected multiple times, he appeared unwilling to let the encounter end. Detectives theorized that he confronted her again as she approached or entered her vehicle. What followed was a violent assault, either inside the car or immediately nearby. The exact sequence could not be determined with certainty, but the outcome was clear. Sarah was brutally attacked and killed. The autopsy results confirmed the severity of the assault. Sarah had sustained more than 40 injuries. Many were concentrated around her head, indicating repeated blows. One especially disturbing finding revealed that part of the weapon used in the attack had broken and remained lodged inside her body. The force required to cause such damage suggested overwhelming rage rather than premeditated restraint. This was not a calculated, detached act. It was explosive and personal. Cell phone data further supported the case against Dante. Records showed that his phone was in the vicinity of Sarah's car around the estimated time of the attack. Location data also placed him near the wooded area where her body was eventually found. Piece by piece, the narrative came together. Despite early investigative errors and public criticism, detectives now had enough evidence to move forward. An arrest warrant was issued for Dante Taylor. By that point, however, he was no longer in New York. Authorities coordinated with law enforcement agencies in Florida, alerting them to be on the lookout. Dante was eventually located in Vero Beach, Florida, where he was taken into custody on an unrelated charge. Although the details of that arrest were never publicly clarified, the active warrant ensured he would be detained. He was extradited back to New York to face charges for Sarah's murder. For Sarah's family, the arrest brought a mixture of relief and grief. Knowing a suspect had been captured did little to ease the loss of a daughter, a sister, and a mother. Still, they hoped the justice system would hold the right person accountable. Dante was formally charged with murder and entered a plea of not guilty. As he awaited trial, prosecutors prepared to present the full scope of evidence. What happened next would determine whether Sarah's voice would finally be heard in a courtroom. And as the trial unfolded, details from Sarah's past would unexpectedly resurface, complicating the case in ways few had anticipated. As the trial approached, prosecutors worked to reconstruct Sarah's final hours with precision. Evidence suggested that Sarah and Dante were not complete strangers. They had crossed paths before and lived relatively close to one another. Their interactions prior to the party appeared casual and unremarkable. There was no indication of a romantic relationship, nor any suggestion that Sarah encouraged Dante's interest. During the June 6th gathering, however, Dante's intentions shifted. Witness testimony described how his repeated attempts to pursue Sarah grew increasingly uncomfortable. When she rejected him, his demeanor reportedly changed. Prosecutors argued that this rejection was the catalyst, an emotional trigger that escalated into violence later that night. According to the state's theory, after leaving the party, Dante obtained a weapon and followed Sarah as she prepared to drive home. When he confronted her again, the situation spiraled out of control. Sarah likely had little time to react before the attack began. The prosecution emphasized that nothing about the encounter was consensual, pointing to the overwhelming forensic evidence and the severity of her injuries. After killing Sarah, Dante allegedly abandoned her vehicle roughly a mile from her home, then transported her body to a nearby wooded area. There, he left her concealed among the trees and attempted to resume his life as if nothing had happened. The prosecution argued that this behavior demonstrated a chilling lack of remorse. As investigators continued digging, they uncovered a disturbing pattern. In 2011, Dante had allegedly threatened another woman who rejected him. That incident involved a knife, and while the woman survived, the similarities were striking. Prosecutors used this information to show that Sarah's murder was not an isolated lapse, but part of a recurring response to rejection. The defense, however, focused almost entirely on procedural failures. They argued that police mishandled Dante's initial questioning and violated his rights by collecting DNA without proper cause. They also attempted to suggest that Sarah's interaction with Dante may have been consensual, a claim prosecutors strongly rejected as baseless and offensive. Another complication arose when the defense pointed to Sarah's former boyfriend, DJ Waters. In the days leading up to her death, Sarah had posted cryptic messages online indicating she felt threatened. One post mentioned someone creeping near her home. Another stated she had been receiving threats for days. An anonymous source later claimed DJ and his mother had left threatening voicemails. Sarah had contacted police about these concerns, and the defense seized on this information, arguing that investigators failed to properly consider alternate suspects. Prosecutors countered that while the threats were concerning, there was no evidence placing DJ anywhere near Sarah that night. His DNA was not in her car. His phone was not near the crime scene. Ultimately, the state maintained that the forensic evidence spoke for itself. Dante Taylor was present. Dante Taylor attacked Sarah, and no amount of deflection could change that reality. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the courtroom waited for a verdict that would determine whether justice would be served or delayed even further. When closing arguments concluded, the jury was left to weigh the evidence. The defense had highlighted investigative mistakes and raised alternative theories, but the prosecution's case remained anchored in physical proof. DNA, palm prints, cell phone location data, and the condition of Sarah's vehicle all pointed in the same direction. Dante Taylor had been present at the crime scene, and the violence inflicted on Sarah left no room for doubt about intent. Dante was given the opportunity to address the court before the verdict was read. He declined to speak. After deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous decision. Dante Taylor was found guilty of murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was delivered, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on everyone present. During sentencing, Dante was condemned to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Observers noted his demeanor throughout the proceedings. He appeared unusually calm and was even seen smiling at times. There was no visible sign of remorse. For Sarah's family, the sentence offered a measure of justice, but nothing could undo the damage that had already been done. While incarcerated, Dante's behavior continued to raise concern. He accumulated disciplinary reports for drug use and misconduct. Medical staff later reported that he expressed ongoing violent and disturbing thoughts. Despite this, he was eventually removed from observation and returned to his cell. Not long after, Dante's family began making claims that he was being mistreated while in custody. A photograph surfaced showing him with visible injuries, suggesting he had been assaulted. While the source of those injuries was never officially confirmed, his family alleged that correctional officers were responsible. On the night of October 7, 2017, prison guards discovered Dante unresponsive in his cell. He was just 22 years old. Emergency efforts were unsuccessful, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. His life sentence had lasted less than a year. News of his death brought complicated emotions. For Sarah's family, there was no closure, only frustration. They had wanted Dante to live with the consequences of his actions for decades. Instead, he escaped that fate. To them, it felt like another injustice layered on top of an already unbearable loss. Dante's mother, Darlene, later filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against prison staff and administrators. She alleged that her son had been denied proper medical care and that officials failed to prevent an assault she believed was imminent. The lawsuit was filed in 2020, but no public updates have confirmed whether it led to compensation or reform. As the legal proceedings faded from public attention, one reality remained unchanged. Sarah Good was gone, and nothing, not verdicts, sentences, or lawsuits, could bring her back. In the end, this case remained heartbreaking from every angle. Sarah's death was sudden, violent, and completely avoidable. She was a young mother who had done everything she could to build a stable life for her daughter. In a single night, that future was taken away. Jocelyn was left to grow up without either parent. One was taken from her through murder. The other vanished from her life entirely. No child should ever have to carry that kind of loss. Childhood is meant to be a time of safety, discovery, and innocence, not one marked by trauma and unanswered questions. What makes this case especially difficult to process is how ordinary it began. A party, friends, a night meant to relieve stress. There were no warning signs that something so horrific would follow. Yet all it took was one individual who could not accept rejection. One moment of entitlement, fueled by anger, led to irreversible consequences for countless people. Entire families were shattered. Friends were left questioning every detail of that night. A community was forced to confront the reality that violence does not always come from strangers. It can emerge from someone standing just a few feet away, unnoticed until it's too late. Sarah's story is not just about a crime. It is about the cost of unchecked rage. It is about how dangerous entitlement can become when paired with instability. And it is a reminder of how quickly lives can be destroyed by a single decision. Although Dante Taylor did not live long enough to serve the full sentence imposed by the court, accountability does not end with legal punishment. Actions carry consequences, whether immediate or delayed. Sarah's memory and the impact of her loss remain. Her daughter will grow older knowing that her mother was loved, that she fought to provide, and that she mattered. And while justice can never restore what was taken, remembering Sarah's story ensures that her life and her humanity are not reduced to a case file or a headline. This tragedy stands as a permanent reminder of the importance of recognizing warning signs, protecting the vulnerable, and taking threats seriously. Lives depend on it, and though the story ends here, its lessons should never be forgotten.